Greetings to you all. My name is Benjamin Ferencz, and I am now in my 96th year. I'm speaking to you from Delray Beach, Florida, at the end of June in the year 2015. I very much regret that I cannot be with you in Salzburg on this occasion, particularly since I want to use the opportunity to pay tribute to my dear friend, Professor Otto Tripp, whom I've known since we started work together in 1971 in the United States to try to create or have accepted a new international criminal court. He was a man who was thoroughly dedicated to his work. He was kindly and patient and liked by everyone. He, with the help of Professor Astrid Corsini, organized the Salzburg University conferences, which I attended for at least 13 years in a row. I will try to share my views regarding the current status of international criminal law, as well as the fight to prevent the existing immunities which exist at this time. But let me first give you a brief introduction to my own biases and my own background. I was an immigrant to the United States from Romania and Hungary. My family was fleeing persecution and poverty. We settled in Hell's Kitchen in New York. We lived in poverty most of my life. I realized at an early age that I wanted to be on the right side of the law, since I was surrounded by crime on all sides and I didn't like it. I eventually applied for a scholarship which was given to me by the Harvard Law School. I don't know why. I had come from a high school for so-called gifted boys. I never knew what a gift was. But I stayed in the law school until the war broke out, and Japan had attacked the United States. Everybody I knew joined up for military service. I couldn't get into the services that I wanted for quite a while. Eventually, I was drafted, joined an artillery battalion being trained for the invasion of France. I need not repeat here the horrors of the war. I landed on the beaches at Normandy. We pursued the Germans all across. When we got to the territory where there were concentration camps run by the Germans, that was the beginning in Germany at the outset, my job was reassigned to go to General Patton's headquarters and set up a war crimes branch, because the President of the United States, together with Stalin and Churchill, had warned the perpetrators that they would be held to account in a court of law for the atrocities which they were committing. So I entered many concentration camps on the days of liberation, witnessed all of the horrors, which are really indescribable, and made reports which then were the basis for war crimes trials. When the war was over, I was very happy to get out of the army and go home and tried to lead a normal life. I never intended to go back to Germany again. But I was recruited by the Pentagon and finally persuaded to go back and serve the Department of the Army, as it was then called, in a civilian capacity with the rank of a full colonel. I had been a sergeant of infantry when I had left. So it was a very dramatic increase within a few months' time from sergeant to colonel. When I got to Nuremberg, my first assignment was to start to collect evidence for the subsequent trials at Nuremberg, which were not generally known to the public, but they followed the trial against Goering and company because the United States felt that we should not settle for just a brief snapshot of a few leaders, but we should paint a broader panorama of how it was possible that a civilized country like Germany could be responsible for all of the incredible horrors which were committed by the Nazi regime. I was sent to Berlin, where I put together a crew of about 50 people to scour the German archives that were still intact Most of them were destroyed. Foreign Ministry, Gestapo headquarters, etc. And one of my researchers came up with a big report in several volumes of the reports of the Einsatzgruppen from the Eastern Front. No one could translate Einsatzgruppen. It meant action groups. And it was deliberately left nondescript in order to disguise what their job was. Their job was to go behind the German lines as they entered Poland and murder, they never used the word murder, and eliminate, without pity or remorse, every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on. And then they reported back to Gestapo headquarters in Berlin with pride what they had done. And I had all the reports. When I totaled up a total of 1 million, I took a sample. I flew from Berlin down to Nuremberg, where my chief then was General Telford Taylor, with whom I was later a law partner. He became a professor at Columbia Law School. I presented this to him, and I said, we have to put on a trial of these mass murderers. He said, we can't. The Pentagon has already approved our budget. The trials we have authorized are already in progress. We don't have staff. We just can't do it. And I was rather insistent. And he said, can you do it in addition to your other functions? And I said, sure. And so he appointed me the chief prosecutor in what was certainly the biggest murder trial in human history. I tried and convicted 22 defendants of murdering over 1 million people in cold blood. That was my first case. I asked myself, what do you ask for? How do you balance it? The murder of millions of people, hundreds of thousands of children, shot one at a time. And I concluded that if the trial was to have any real value, it was to build up principles of international law. These people had all been murdered. The victims had been killed because they didn't share the race or the religion or the ideology of their executioners. I felt then very strongly that was a terrible thing. I had seen the operation in the concentration camps in action, with the crematoria going, the bodies covering the floor, the total chaos, people starving to death. And I felt very strongly in my opening plea to say that the case we present is a plea of humanity to law. It was to uphold the right of all people, regardless of their race or creed, to live in peace and human dignity. I was then 27 years old. I had never seen a complaint before. But these ideals remained with me my whole life and are with me still. The next case, war crimes case I tried, was when we finally created a new international criminal court in The Hague, the first international court to follow after Nuremberg. And the chief prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo of Argentina, invited me to make the closing remarks for the prosecution, which I did. I went to The Hague and presented the closing case, repeating again the plea of humanity to law. I was then 92 years old. So if there are some of you who are listening to this are looking for a busy career in trying international criminal cases, you should bear in mind that it took me quite a while before we could get to the second case. However, I'm sure that your world will be different, and we have come a long way since that time. So there you have a bit of my background. I spent the rest of my life trying to make good for some of the harm that had been done by the Germans, to try to rescue their victims and to hold accountable those who were responsible for the wrongs. I stayed on in Germany after the subsequent Nuremberg trials as well, in order to set up restitution and compensation programs for the victims. This involved negotiating treaties with the West German government, which was the only former German government willing to make any payments of any kind. We were responding to a recognition by the Catholic German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, in which he acknowledged that terrible crimes had been committed in the name of the German people, and that imposed upon them an obligation to try to make amends. These were ordinary principles of law and justice. And of course, it had never happened before. Never after a war had the defeated country agreed to pay individual compensation to victims or to restore the property which had been stolen from individual households. I set up that program, and it was quite extensive, and it continues to this day. There is no Nazi victim who has not been a beneficiary or a potential beneficiary of that program, which has cost the West German government hundreds of billions of dollars by now, is my recent estimate. So when I returned to the States, I found that I'd been detached from any gainful employment possibilities because the law firms wanted to know how many clients could I bring with me. The clients that I've been dealing with, only thing they had to show was a tattoo on their arm. They had nothing, absolutely nothing. And it was not easy then to reestablish myself in law, but I formed a partnership with Telford Taylor. He had similar problems. And in due course, he decided to become a professor at Columbia Law School, and I decided to give up the practice of law and to devote myself to trying to create a more humane and peaceful world. And I've been doing that ever since, and I will continue to do it. So there you have the background, and that may explain my approach to some of the problems I will be dealing with as assigned for this conference. The international criminal justice system, as it stands today, is badly in need of a major overhaul or some additional steps forward. I will be completely frank in my evaluations, even if they may sound harsh. I would begin with what we tried to do at Nuremberg. The main point of the Nuremberg trials was the condemnation of aggressive war. The main proponent of condemning illegal war-making as a crime was one of the most respected jurists in the United States, Justice Robert Jackson, who sat on the Supreme Court of the United States. During the trial and his opening statement, and it was reaffirmed in the decisions of the entire tribunal, consisting of the British and the French and the Soviet judges and representatives, he made it very clear that aggression was the supreme international crime because it encompassed all the other crimes. I could confirm that as a combat soldier. I was in Berlin very shortly after it was liberated, so-called, by the Russians. There has never been a war without rape of the women. There never will be a war without rape being part of the policy. And that is not the most severe of all crimes, if you can begin to classify such things. Pillage, murder, theft, plunder, all of it takes place in every war, on all sides. And Jackson made the point that the law has to be subject to change to meet the needs of a changing society. And we must not forget our common sense in interpreting the law. And he wrote a report to the President of the United States, Harry Truman, explaining specifically that he intended to bring to justice the leading individuals who were responsible for the terrible crimes which were committed by the Nazi regime. Truman, of course, approved completely of that, and it was reaffirmed again by the President of the United States before the United Nations. Another very vital point, which is often ignored, is that crimes are committed by individuals. They're not committed by abstract entities. They're committed by people who direct the entities and the people who may have to carry out their policies to do certain deeds which are criminal. And although no one had ever been convicted of the crime of aggression before, although it had been soundly condemned and efforts were made to convict some of the people of that particular crime after the First World War, he felt that the time had come for the law to take a step forward. And it certainly had. No one knows for sure how many people die in wars. From what I've seen myself of bodies being shoveled into a hole by bulldozers, you cannot count the bodies, nor can you count the people who died of heartbreak and of illness and disease, of starvation because they couldn't be fed. But surely around 100 million people had been killed in war. If we could only eliminate war, what a big improvement the world would be. And so that's why the Nuremberg Tribunal condemned not only the crime of aggression, but crimes against humanity, which listed the usual crimes of murder and rape and pillage, etc. And that was affirmed by the United Nations, and they immediately decided they were going to set up another international criminal court and continue with the Nuremberg precedents. There were some objections to that, and so they broke it down into committees. One committee was to draft a code of crimes, which would be then enforced by an international court. Some people objected to that and said, well, aggression, which was then called a crime against peace, was a little too vague. So a committee was appointed to deal with the crime of aggression. That was in 1945. Believe it or not, 70 years later, the nations of the world are still trying to define aggression. I sat through most of those meetings. I sat through for, I think it was 19 years before they came up with a consensus definition of aggression, prepared by a special committee of the United Nations, submitted to and accepted by the General Assembly, and then promptly forgotten. It was, in my judgment, a totally inadequate definition because they had exculpatory clauses, that is, clauses allowing people to avoid prosecution if the acts were done in pursuit of self-determination or freedom from alien domination and things like that, which are usually the cause why people go to war. And it had so many loopholes in it that I thought, and I wrote an article to that effect, the article title was Civ or Substance. And I said it was a sieve, and I pointed out specifically why. But nevertheless, I didn't want to be negative, so I said it did reflect the fact that the public wanted to have something done to stop aggression. So it reflected their determination. Well, the reason that was then ignored, and the reason it has not been defined to this day, in my judgment, is not a dispute about whether Article 125A or 126B applies. It's because the people who are dealing with it, those in power, don't want to define aggression because they don't want to be tried for aggression. Not only that, they don't want to give up what they call their sovereign right to go to war whenever they think it's in their national interest to do so. Well, let's pause for a moment and look at that sovereign right. It goes back to the various treaties in Westphalia and in other places about 350 years ago, where they came to a conclusion that all these little fiefdoms which existed in Italy and in Europe in all different cities and towns and districts would change, and we would set up a system of state sovereignty. And each state was sovereign. The king was sovereign within his terrain, and the king could do no wrong. In modern times, the notion of absolute state sovereignty is absolutely obsolete. The king is not above the law. No one is above the law. At Nuremberg, too, it was clear the law applies equally to everyone, and that includes also the heads of state, and maybe sometimes particularly the heads of state, because they may be the ones responsible for the wrongdoing occurring and has occurred and will continue to occur unless we change the current system. So these were the principles of Nuremberg, which we hoped would be adopted and followed in order to deter people from committing the terrible crimes which had been the substance of World War II. It was never the objective to try all the criminals. It would have been impossible. There were hundreds of thousands of criminals. I know from my Einsatzgruppen trial, there were 3,000 men who every day went out and killed thousands of people, hundreds of children, one shot at a time. There was no way we could put 3,000 people on trial. And even in rape cases, the Russian troops came in and they raped everybody they could rape in Berlin. German women were looking for an American to protect them from the Russians. So that's the world which We are trying to change. And if you allow wars to take place, that's what's going to happen. I guarantee it. Particularly if you have no court to try the offenders. And in connection with the crime of aggression, they came up with different definitions, but they always put in a clause, however, no court can try this crime unless they meet this additional hurdle, and they throw another hurdle in. The latest one is it had to be a manifest violation of the UN Charter. Then they reach what they call a consensus agreement. That sounds great. They finally agreed. They all agreed. It's a misleading thing. Consensus means that everybody has to agree. So everybody has a veto. Well, if you have 100 nations there, they're sure not going to agree on a complicated thing like aggression. The only thing they can agree upon by consensus was they postpone the meeting, have another meeting. And that's what they do very well and consistently. And I've gotten to be an old man waiting for these consensus definitions to produce something of substance which is worthwhile in the interests of mankind. All of my studies, which are reproduced in books, 2 volumes on defining aggression, 2 volumes on International Criminal Court, 2 volumes on enforcing international law, 1 volume on global survival, period, are available free of charge on my website. My website is my name, Ben Ferencz, BenFerencz. I want no credit. Nothing is necessary except to use the information for the interest of world peace. I'll sum it up for you. I concluded that you need 3 things in order to have a peaceful world. For a peaceful society, you need laws which define what's permissible and what's not permissible. You need courts to serve as a forum for settling disputes amicably or to hold accountable the wrongdoing party. And you need a system of effective enforcement. In the international sphere, we have laws beginning to define what's right. We have laws protecting humanity. We have human rights laws. We have conventions of various kinds. We have courts now beginning to function. We have the International Criminal Court. We have courts for Yugoslavia, some of the national courts, and we have no enforcement. And that's what's happening. And that will continue to happen until such time as you add the necessary essential ingredient for a peaceful society. You will not have a peaceful society. And don't blame it on this group or that group. We are structurally not set up as an institution to effectively deter war making. And the goal is always deterrence. It's not to fill up the jails with criminals. It's to let them know that they will be held to account in a court of law for their action. If they know in advance that they will not held to account, that increases the crime, not decreases it. That is the current status, because in connection with the crime of aggression, or the crime against peace, as the Russians called it, nobody can be tried. It says so specifically until you jump through this hurdle, that hurdle, this hurdle, that hurdle, and then you get 30 ratifications, and then you have to have it accepted here and there, because they don't intend for you to try them. They don't want you to try them. They don't trust the court to try them. I can't say that they are all wrong. The United States, which is in the leader opposition to it, is a great democracy. People have differences of opinion, and it's as it should be. There are some who are quite conservative, who say, as Field Marshal von Moltke said after the First World War, we have the power. That's the only thing that counts. The ones who have the power should use it. There are those in the United States who still share that point of view. I don't share that point of view, but I think the view should be respected, whether it's functional, whether it's useful. It's getting, in my opinion, very, very much more dangerous, because I don't know what will survive the next world war. Let me tell you a little story. I was in St. Petersburg, Russia. There I met an American general. And I said, you know, General, what are you working on now? And he said, I'm working on the cyberspace problem. I said, what's the cyberspace problem? He said, well, you know, we now have the capacity from cyberspace to cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth. I said, no, I didn't know that. I said, I know how long it takes a man to die if he's hanging by the neck, 6 or 8 minutes. But I don't know how long it takes for everybody to die if you shut off the electrical grid. The hospitals can't work, the water pumps don't work, lights don't work, the telephones don't work. How long will it be before everybody's dead? He said, well, no, I'm not working on that. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, the problem is that China can do it too. and so can the Russians. Since that time, of course, we have not diminished in our capacity to destroy all life on this planet. We have increased it, because as each country develops that, the other countries say, oh, they're ahead of us. We have to get a new appropriation. We have to modernize the equipment. And so they're spending billions of dollars every day. And the public don't know that the only function of that is to kill larger number of people. The nuclear bomb is obsolete. Cut off the electrical grid in Washington, D.C., or in your city, wherever you're coming from, in Salzburg. See how long it takes you to die. Well, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? That's the world in which you live. Wake up. You cannot use the old system. You cannot say our sovereignty is at stake. Therefore, we reserve the right to do that. You are threatening all of mankind with today's capacity to kill more numbers of people. It's even worse than that. Because you do that, more and more people are starving, more and more people are discontent, more and more people feel they're being neglected, and we don't have the means to pay for it. And so it's a self-defeating prophecy, and that's the system we're in. You wanted me to talk about the current international law system? I'm telling you, it's pretty pathetic. It's pretty pathetic, and it's up to the lawyers to change it. But don't look to the lawyers to change it by themselves. I've talked to diplomats by the dozens, by the score, by the bushel. The hope lies with young people who will recognize the truth of what I say and will set about trying to correct it. Say, is it possible to do that? I say, of course it's possible to do that. But we see these great inventions here which could be used for peaceful purposes and must be used for peaceful purposes. We have to change the way people think about war and peace. In my very considered judgment, after many years, many years of trying to get aggression condemned as a punishable international crime, I have concluded that we must do something supplemental to protect humanity. We must declare what we used to call aggression to be a crime against humanity. Crimes against humanity are condemned in the Code of the International Criminal Court and in many national jurisdictions. We have to interpret that correctly. All of them have a clause at the end, other inhumane acts, so words to that effect. They list murder and rape and pillage and piracy and torture. All those are listed as crimes against humanity, and then they say, and other inhumane acts. I want to add there, such as the illegal use of armed force that knowingly will kill large numbers of innocent civilians is a crime against humanity. So we've got to use the law as an instrument of public policy, and the young people have got to insist upon it, because all I'm asking nations to do is what seems common sense. I know they have avoided doing it up to now, but it's too dangerous. We see the disastrous results. I would suppose the people in Japan have suffered enough. I would suppose the people in Germany have suffered enough. They immediately, after the war, put into their laws that they will not commit aggression, they will not maintain armies for aggressive purposes. We have to make that a reality. In fact, the Security Council, which was the instrumentality voted upon in 1945 for the purpose of preserving the peace, because they were the only ones with the power, their assignment was to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. They have not done it. They have failed miserably in carrying out that function, which they alone had the power to do for many years. Now there are other people in the game. So we have failed to build the third leg, the enforcement principles, which were written into the Charter and then ignored, such as the demilitarization, the ending of the arms race, the creation of an international military force to maintain the peace. Where are they? Where are they? I'm talking now to the powers that had the ability in 1945 to do it. And what did they do? They had a few silly meetings and they went home and insisted upon protecting their own power and their own privileges. And that was their primary goal. And the rest, they did nothing. Now everybody's paying the price for that. And will continue to pay the price for that. So you cannot have a peaceful world order in which the protagonists are the ones who decide whether they're right or wrong. Each one says that he's right and the other one is wrong. and therefore they're entitled to go and kill them by whatever means are available to them. If they have drones and if they have all kinds of fancy weapons, they use those. If you don't have drones and you've got nothing but a Molotov cocktail or a small bomb, you use that one. If you have to use Terra instruments in order to get attention, you do that. You burn down the building. You have a plane flying. That was already a very unusual capacity. So you have people who believe in their ideals. You cannot kill an ideology with a gun. That has never occurred to the people who send people out to face other people who want to kill them and are ready to die for their particular cause, whether it be their religion or their nationality or their economic condition or whatever. These are people who have a firm opinion. How do you break through this terrible situation which has existed for thousands of years, where we have glorified war making, and you say to them, sorry boys, that game is over because it's going to kill everybody. You've got to stop glorifying war. You must treat it for what it is. It's hell. And I say that not only as a combat soldier who has been there. They awarded me 5 battle stars for not getting killed in any of the major battles of the war. But a man like Dwight D. Eisenhower, President of the United States, made it very clear. He said the world can no longer rely on force. If a civilization is to survive, it must choose the rule of law. The time has come for us not to talk about improving paragraph this and paragraph that. The time has come to say that the illegal use of armed force, that is, it's not in self-defense and it's not approved by the Security Council, is a crime against humanity for which the individual perpetrators responsible for that act, knowing that it will kill large numbers of innocent civilians, must explain it in a court of law. As an added precaution, I would also sue them civilly. I went after the German companies after World War II who had used and worked to death many slave laborers who worked for them, the biggest German companies. And I said, look, you owe something to the survivors. And they said, who, me? Not me. Oh, no, I didn't. Everything was fine. So we've got to make sure that there's a civil penalty as well. So these heads of state who manage to hide something in a Swiss bank will know if we find it, they're going to pay for it. We use every means to impress upon them that the behavior we're trying to deter will end them in a court, and they can't continue the existing immunity and the impunity of a head of state. That goes back 500 years. The king can do no wrong by divine right. If you believe that that's a system you want to be under, go back 500 years and live in that society. It's not this world. This is a hyper-tech world, which is so different that you won't recognize it 10 years from today what it was 50 years ago. It's not easy. It's not quick. I will not be able to complete the job in my lifetime. For that, I look to you. But what you do is you try to first clarify the law. It's a law school here. These are the lawyers who should write the articles saying that the illegal use of armed force is a crime against humanity under existing national law, where it's in the national statute, where it's not put it in, under principles of existing universal jurisdiction, so that any time you catch the person responsible, wherever you catch them, you can put them on trial. The next thing, what you need, is you go to the ultimate court. You have international courts, you have national courts, but the ultimate court is the court of public opinion. You have to educate the public, and there you have to begin with the children. And you begin to teach compassion, understanding, a willingness to compromise, and stop glorifying war making. You have the flags flying and the parades marching and everybody is cheering and they think it's wonderful and they feel excitement and thrill. They don't see what I see. I see blood, rivers of blood. You've got to see the reality of it. You can't do that anymore. There's nothing heroic about war making. Use the media for that. Use your television shows like this one. Normally I would have been to Salzburg. I've been there 13 times at least to lecture to students like you, and hundreds of lectures. But now I'm 96 and I have a 96-year-old wife who we've been happily wed for 70 years, and I have other obligations to fulfill. So I cannot run around the world, but you can. And just take my material, use it. If you can improve on it, so much the better. And will there be jobs for you, which you all want to know? Certainly there are jobs. There are jobs to clarify the law. There are lawyers to represent clients in civil actions who have been injured as a result of this. And there are lectures, there are teaching. There are all kinds of new things which you should invent. to make it possible. So there you have a quick outline of what I think your current status of the law is. A word, it's terrible. What about the impunity? It's an insult to human intelligence to say that the guy who's responsible for the crime, because he's head of state, he cannot be held to account for the crime. That's terrible. That increases the crime. It doesn't decrease it. I tell a story which has appeared in several films so far, and it's the story of Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer. He tried to fathom the meaning of the universe by studying the stars, and he did for, say, 25 years. And when the king's heirs came and said, "What are you doing, old man?" At a special astronomical observatory he had built near Elsinore in Denmark, and he said, "I'm charting the stars." So what for? What do you do with that? He said, "Well, we hope to find the meaning of the universe, and I must admit that I have not yet found the meaning of the universe." "Well, what do you hope to achieve with this?" He said, "Well, I have already 97 charts, and if I live long enough, I hope to have 100. But what's the utility of it?" He said, "I don't know for sure, but I do believe that one day somebody will discover the meaning of the universe, and I will have saved that person 25 years of labor." And when an American finally, I don't know, 200 years later, whenever it was, planted the American flag on the moon, they had with them the tables of Tycho. So I haven't been a watcher of the skies, but my eyes will soon be closed. And there'll be somebody else out there, perhaps in this audience, which will pick up the flag and carry it forward. I wish you all the best of luck. Goodbye.